visit wouldn't be complete without a drive to the top of Mount Panorama to experience the racing circuit and view the magnificent outlook of the city and the rural countryside. Bathurst is steeped in history and combines the old and new in a picturesque rural setting. Bathurst truly is the city in the country. After paying a visit to the tourist centre, why not take a stroll around the historic city centre and relax in the beautiful parks? Bathurst also has a claim to fame in being the birthplace of one of Australia's famous Prime Ministers, the late Ben Chifley.
This video, as part of the Remember series, only lightly touches the surface of the Ben Chifley story. However, it was felt appropriate to compile what we had filmed over the years as a starting point for researchers. One significant event that brought the Ben Chifley story to the fore again was the unveiling of a memorial plaque in 2001, commemorating 50 years since the death of Ben Chifley. 2006 was the 121st anniversary of Chifley's birth. His vision as a Prime Minister was aptly outlined in the annual Light on the Hill address in Bathurst, given by the guest speaker, New South Wales Premier Maurice Yemmer. Mr Yemmer told the large crowd attending the dinner how appropriate the Charles Sturt University venue was in fulfilling one of Chifley's main dreams of making higher education accessible to all. A number of books, plays and more recently a film have been compiled on highlights of Chifley's life and his rise to power. There is also much valuable information to be found on the internet and in talking to his direct descendants, a number of whom still reside in Bathurst. Close to the railway, which Ben Chifley would have known well from his time as an engine driver, is the Chifley Home located in Busby Street. As part of the commemoration activities, actor Tony Barry will be playing the part of Ben Chifley, delivering his famous Light on the Hill address. Firstly, however, we'll have a quick look through the home and its memorabilia. Ben Chifley joined the railway at 17 and by 24 was a first-class locomotive driver. In 1914, Ben Chifley married Elizabeth Mackenzie and together they moved into 10 Busby Street. This modest house would be their only home for their 37 years of marriage.
Men and women of Australia, I have had the privilege of leading the Labor Party for nearly 4 years. They've not been easy times, and it's not been an easy job. It was a man-killing job. It would have been impossible had it not been for the help of my colleagues in the Labor movement. No Labor minister or leader ever has an easy job. The urgency that rests behind the Labor movement, pushing it on to do things, to create new conditions, to reorganise the economy of the country, always means that the people who work within the Labor movement, people who lead, never have an easy job. The job of the evangelist is never easy. Because of the turn of fortune's wheel, your Premier, Mr McGurr, and I have gained some prominence in the Labor movement. But the strength of the movement cannot come from us. We may make plans and pass legislation to help direct the economy of the country, but the job of getting the things the people of the country want comes from the roots of the Labor movement, the people who support it. When I sat at a Labor meeting in the country with only 10 or 15 men there, I sat next to a man who'd been working within the Labor movement for 54 years. Now, I have no doubt that many of you out there have been doing the same, not hoping for any personal gain from the movement, not hoping for any advantage, but because you believe in a movement that's been built up to bring better conditions to the people. Therefore, the success of the Labor Party at the next elections depends entirely, where it always has done, on people who work. I try to think of the Labor movement not as putting an extra sixpence into someone's pocket or making someone Premier or Prime Minister, but as a movement bringing something better to the people. We have a great objective, the light on the hill, which we aim to reach by working for the betterment of mankind, not only here, but anywhere we may lend a helping hand. If it were not for that, the Labor movement would not be worth fighting for. If the movement can make someone more comfortable, give to some father or mother a greater feeling of security for their children, a feeling that if a depression comes there will be work, that the government is striving its hardest to do its best, then the Labor movement will be completely justified. It does not matter about persons like me who have our limitations. I only hope that the generosity, kindliness and friendliness shown to me by thousands of my colleagues in the Labor movement will continue to be given to the movement and add zest to its work. I thank you all for coming. Biscuits on at Mrs. Woodman's place, so if you make your way there.
The plan to restore the famous Chifley engine is one that has suffered many years of frustration, despite the valiant efforts of a number of rail groups and enthusiasts, especially over the past 2 decades. The engine was once the working office of Bathurst's favourite son, Ben Chifley, during his time as a working class man. That was before he entered politics and went on to become one of Australia's favourite Prime Ministers. What we have filmed here are the efforts of Bathurst Regional Council and the Powerhouse Museum to transport the locomotive to the Lithgow Heritage Park Museum in 2005. This was to help assess what was needed to restore the engine to running order as a tourist train or as a static display. Unfortunately, things are again at a standstill in 2007, but Council is trying hard to get the project on track. The 17-year saga to restore the old locomotive is going nowhere fast. The loco had been undergoing some on-again and off-again restorations at Orange until being returned unfinished to the Bathurst Council depot some years ago. It is hoped this new move to Lithgow may breathe some new life into the restoration project. John Clay, you've been very much involved in this move. Could you tell me a little about the history of the Chifley engine, where it's been or what's been going on with it?
Well, I suppose that the Chifley engine started off in its significance to Bathurst because it was driven by the former Prime Minister, Ben Chifley. It came to Bathurst as its final resting place in 1974. It came under its own steam here, and it lived at the Bathurst railway station on a plinth under a cover for about 14 years until 1989, when the council received a proposal from the Central West Railway Preservation Society to take the engine to that society's yard at Orange and for it to be restored there to operating condition. Now that move happened, and a lot of good work was done on the engine. Probably most significantly, the boiler, Bruce, was fully reconstructed, and that's probably the biggest job in getting a steam locomotive back to operating condition. So that was done, and it was steam tested and hydrostatically tested in 1992. So it's ready to go back into service, just with another steam test to comply with steam regulations. There were a few changes that happened with the society in Orange. Some of its members moved away, and it came into the state where it wasn't really in a position to carry on the work, and so the council, after a lot of discussions and negotiations with the society, decided to bring the engine back to Bathurst. And it was brought back here to the council works depot, where it's been for about 4 years. During the last 4 years, the council has been exploring how to get the restoration process back into gear, and it's had a lot of very fruitful and long discussions with the State Mine Heritage Park and Railway at Lithgow. Probably about 3 years ago, the council was in a position where it could have moved the engine at that time, but unfortunately the State Mine Park had a fire in their locomotive engine shed, which put them back for about 18 months or 2 years, and we've now gone through a number of years just waiting for a conjunction of circumstances to arise where we had an opportunity to move the engine to a more favourable location. It's been out in the weather since it was moved to Orange in 1989, so when it goes over to Lithgow, the first thing that will happen is it will go into the locomotive engine shed and be kept out of the weather, which will be a huge bonus for its conservation, and the council is hoping to work with the State Mine Park people to develop a restoration plan and pursue funding, grant funding to assist in the restoration of the locomotive. The council's also committed about $20,000 a year for the next 4 years to devote to the restoration, which will provide seed funding for that work.
Excellent.
So we hope.
The Powerhouse Museum, is it involved at all?
Yeah, the Powerhouse has been involved probably since about 1988. The Powerhouse Museum and their staff have been a great help to the council over the last probably 5 or 6 years. Their head conservator Ross Goodman and their senior curator Andrew Grant carried out a review of the work that needed to be done on the Chifley engine to bring it back into either operational or static display condition, and we have a report from them to that effect, which is really good. It's really excellent baseline information on where we need to go to from here. And the powerhouse has also been involved in supervising the 2 moves of the engine and provided technical advice and technical support in that regard. So we've developed a really good relationship with the powerhouse. I think the council is hoping that we may be able to continue that through the restoration of the locomotive, so that we have their very considerable expertise on tap for advice as we go through the restoration process.
John, you know quite a bit about this engine. Could you tell me some of the parts, and we'll follow them through as you describe them?
Well, we've just had the smokestack taken off, Bruce, which is attached to the steam box, which is the black part, the front end of the boiler, and the draft moves from the rear. That other square section at the rear with all the rivets is the firebox.
Right.
And the fire moves through the boiler tubes into the smoke box. And it's drawn through there when the steam exhausts from the cylinders at the front there. It creates a draft. Excuse me.
Right.
Don't lose that. The pressure release valve that goes on top of the steam dome, which is that silver cylindrical thing on the top of the boiler. That's where the steam is drawn to drive the pistons. It's the driest steam, and of course you've got a pressure relief valve in that area. The little black thing at the front of the firebox is the turbo generator, and that uses steam from the boiler to generate electricity for the locomotive's lights and other electrical needs. And the other ancillary power is supplied by the air compressor, which is that 2 cylinders with the thin lower cylinder just on that first section of the boiler behind the smoke box. And that again uses steam from the boiler to compress air for the locomotive brakes and for the brakes on all the carriages that might be drawing along. And just at the front there, the silver thing underneath the front of the smoke box is the cylinder, that's where the steam power is converted to motive power.
Right.
To reciprocating
and there's a Venturi system, is there, at the back of that?
You can't really see it all that well, but at the back of the cab there, behind the white panel that has the steps for the driver to climb, there's a massive pipes, and then there's another black pipe that's about 2 inches diameter that's running forward about halfway up the side of the boiler. That's the steam injector system. There are 2 of those, one on each side of the engine. And that uses the pressure of steam in a very clever Venturi system that was invented by a Frenchman sometime in the 1700s to inject fresh water, or cold water, into the boiler. The boiler runs at about 200 pounds per square inch, and it uses steam drawn from the boiler to inject it in at a higher pressure, and it does so by accelerating the water and the steam to above the speed of sound, or about 700 miles an hour, and that overcomes the boiler pressure, and it enters the boiler through 2 plaque valves, which are the small valves just behind the top of the smoke box up there.
So they were quite clever in their engineering at that period.
Very clever, really. Yeah, it's amazing what they did and what they could do. Yeah. And just the craftsmanship that went into these is pretty amazing too. Don French here was telling us that the smoke box is made from one sheet of about 5/8 inch steel, and it's all riveted. It's got an inner and an outer casing, and what they used to do apparently was drill all the holes for the rivets before they bent it, and then they'd bend it, and all the rivets holes would line up perfectly between the inner and the outer skins, which is pretty amazing.
Accuracy.
Pretty amazing craftsmanship. Yeah. Now, Ross, it's been quite a couple of days getting the Chifley engine ready to be moved. Can you tell us maybe what some of the greatest challenges were?
Oh, no really great challenge in any particular part. I mean, when we first pulled up here and look at all the parts on the ground and think we're going to be here for a week sorting this lot out, and having it done in a day, it was very, very good feeling. The fact that the engine's gone on and the tender has gone on extremely easily and extremely well, I think it's all down to the experience and to the workmanship of the blokes who are driving the cranes and the trucks.
And of course you were involved in the move from Orange about 4 years ago. Has today been any more straightforward than that move?
Yes, it has. I think it's just the repeat of the same thing, so it's not nearly as bad as the first time.
Excellent. And can you tell us how the part assembly part of the job went, in your view?
The individual components sort out.
Yes.
It went well. I mean, we managed to put, I think, most of the components into their relative places, so that when it comes time to carry on the reconstruction work, should be able to call up individual pallet loads without any problems. We'll later on identify from your photographs, John, what each of those parts are on the pallets, and that should again make it easier as well.
So hopefully it's full steam ahead, if you'll pardon the pun, for the reconstruction of the Chifley engine.
Hopefully, yes. I think the council has got a great opportunity here to do something, and it's good to see them taking the initiative and doing it.
Yeah, recently we just observed you removing the smokestack from the front of the engine. Can you tell us why that was necessary?
Well, it depended on which truck they bought, on how high the boiler would be, and with clearance underneath telephone lines as it goes through Lithgow. Coming from Orange wasn't such a big problem. There wasn't such a height restriction, but going into Lithgow there's a lot of low telephone lines.
And it shouldn't be any problem to refit the smokestack. It's just a bolting back in place sort of operation, I guess?
Yes, it's just a joint that goes on there, a gasket joint, and then half a dozen bolts and with nuts and spring washers.
Now, Ross, can you tell us what the weight of the engine and the tender are in this move?
In this move, they're about 50 odd tonne each. When they're in steam, the engine weighs about 64.5 tonne and the tender weighs about the same. It's not the original tender. Originally it came out with a very small tender on it, but the railways found for more versatility they put what's known as Commonwealth tenders on, 5,000 gallon tenders. They're quite heavy, but they extend the range enormously.
Now, Ross, this time again, like the move from Orange, we've got Peter Henry Transport from Lithgow doing the move, and with their cranes as well, and they seem to be quite used to moving these sort of bits of machinery around.
I imagine they move a lot of heavy mine machinery around. This was most probably not a very big move for them, I would imagine. I imagine this would just be another day at the office.
And you actually are involved at the Powerhouse Museum in moving engines and rail motors around and that sort of thing, aren't you?
Yes, we are. We put a rail motor into the museum 4 nights ago, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we're pulling it out again on this Monday night, I think, at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, well, this is a bit more civilised in the country, isn't it?
Hours-wise, yes. Parts standing in the rain. I mean, Bathurst in a drought. Move a steam engine, it's going to rain for you.
All right, well, thanks very much, Ross.
To recreate the nostalgia of the steam train era, I've included a clip of one of the first music videos we were asked to compile some 20 years ago. The standard goods engine of the 53 class featured is very similar to the Chifley engine, which is a 50 class. During his time as an engine driver, Ben Chifley would have traversed the Bathurst-Cowra line, the Lithgow line, and the Orange and Wellington lines many times.
Across the golden fields of summer weeks, they labored in the sun. At night they drank their bays away, a song or two was sung. On a winter morning in the Bathurst camp, the frost lay on the ground. The pick and shovel and the gangers cry was the only sound. Hey, hey, what do you say? 100 years ago, they laid the rails out to Cowra Town where the Lachlan River flows. They say on a cold night in Blaney, temperature gets low. A full load working up the 140s, sometimes gets slow. On a crystal night, you can hear it coming down by Woodstock Road. A 5-chime whistle in the distant hills, you can see the 5-box glow. Hey, hey, what do you say? 100 years ago, they laid the rails out to Cowra Town where the Lachlan River flows. So raise your glass and give a cheer sunny days. In times of change, it seems so strange to travel other ways. When the oil runs out, you'll hear them shout, what we gonna do? We'll swing the banjo at the firebox door, just like they used to do. Hey, hey, what do you say? 100 years ago, they laid the rails out to Cowratown where the Lachlan River flows. Hey, hey, what do you say? 100 years ago, they laid the rails out to Cowratown where the Lachlan River flows.
Despite the rain on Wednesday the 13th of June 2001, Bathurst residents arrived at Alan Morse Park to pay tribute to the former Prime Minister Ben Chifley, who died 50 years ago. The focus of the event was to welcome the Chifley family members and the unveiling of a bronze bas-relief of Ben and Elizabeth Chifley.
Welcome to this occasion, which marks the 50th anniversary of Ben Chifley's death. Our being here today results from a vision for a Chifley Memorial revealed by the Reverend Stuart Clement.
Thank you, Kath. One and all, and particularly members of the Chifley family. The Premier has asked me to convey this message to the citizens of Bathurst. The Labor Government of New South Wales will have a very special reason to remember Ben Chifley with deep gratitude. In the 1930s, in the aftermath of the Great Depression, Ben Chifley made immense personal sacrifices to work for Labor unity. Without his efforts, the New South Wales Labor Party would never have been able to re-establish itself as the greatest political force for good in this state and the nation of Australia. This is something which goes beyond mere political partisanship. Because Ben Chifley's work in New South Wales in the 30s laid the foundations for two great governments in the 40s, the McKell government of New South Wales from May 1941 and the Curtin government of Australia from October 1941. These governments led Australia through its time of maximum change. They took Australia to victory in war and on to independence. In 1943, John Curtin said, "I wouldn't like to think how I could carry on this job without what I get from old Ben." In his own prime ministership from 1945 to 1949, Chifley had many great colleagues, men like Evans, Edmund, Cornwall and Ward. And there were young men of promise like Fred Daly and Kim Bees. Ben Chifley was in every best sense a simple man of the people. He drew strength from the people, not least from the people of Bathurst, and he loved this place. When they conferred on him the freedom of the city of Bathurst in 1949, he said that he valued that honour more than being a Privy Councillor. On his monument there are inscribed the words he spoke to the New South Wales Labor Conference in Sydney 3 days before his death. If an idea is worth fighting for, no matter the penalty, fight for the right, then truth and justice will prevail. In the same speech, Ben Chifley said, "We may make mistakes because we are only human. No political party can remake human nature. The most we can do is to help the masses of the ordinary people and give them some sense of security and some degree of human happiness." In these quotations we have both the grandeur and the simplicity of Ben Chifley. 50 years have not dimmed the light on the hill.
Thank you. Welcome to everybody, and I certainly want to recognise the Chifley family members that are here with us today. And I have a legal message from the Leader of the Opposition, Kim Beazley, who fought the position that Ben held at the time of his death. ceremony to mark the 50th anniversary of the death of Ben Chifley in Bathurst. Ben Chifley is an important and revered part of the history of Bathurst, of the Australian nation, and the Labour Party to which he devoted his public life. One of Ben Chifley's great strengths was that he did not only sign up to the ideas and ideals of Labour, but at times he went beyond the party orthodoxy to listen to people as all good leaders should. When he coined the expression, the light on the hill, Ben Chifley gave Labour an enduring goal. He said on the 12th of June 1949, 2 years and 1 day before he died, "We have a great objective, the light on the hill, which we aim to reach by working for the betterment of mankind, not only here, but anywhere we may give a helping hand." It has never been said better. Ben Chifley will always be remembered as a great Australian, a great son of Bathurst, and a great leader of the Australian Labour Party. Kim Beasley, first, the 13th of June 2001.
Stuart Clement, who introduced the Chifley family.
Thank you, Jim. And all of us who are interested in the future and the future welfare of our city and our nation, welcome to all of us, including, of course, myself. Now, I have the very happy task of introducing John in a moment, who will introduce the other members of the Chifley family present. But I've also been asked to do something which is not there on the actual program, and that is to speak a word for the children. They're not here, but of course all of us were children once, and I was a boy in Busby Street. And so perhaps I could say a few words about Mr. and Mrs. Chifley and my recollection of them. Busby Street in those days was a one-block street, short street with plenty of kids. And I think Ben Chifley and Mrs. Chifley actually knew the names of all the children in Busby Street. I recollect the day walking along and Roy Hobson came. And I said, "Roy, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going down to Mr. Chifley, I'm going to get a reference from him." And no doubt he did. All sorts of intimate things like that. And one of my happy remembrances is of the days when Mrs. Chifley used to gather up the Presbyterian children and take them down to St. Stephen's, my sister and myself included. And then afterwards, I hear from Alan Peterson that in fact Ben would go around to St. Philomena. I recollect one day he became treasurer, and I looked up books somehow or other and found out that several previous treasurers had become Prime Minister. So I recollect saying to Mr. Chifley, "Mr. Chifley," and he said, "Yes, Stuart." I said, "You're treasurer?" He said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Someday you'll be Prime Minister." Mr. So-and-so was treasurer, he became Prime Minister. Mr. So-and-so was treasurer, he became Prime Minister. He laughed his head off. And all sorts of things like that I remember. Barbara Ewan was saying to me, you know, how when she was a little girl, she used to go across to some of the other girls in the street to Mrs. Mackenzie, Mrs. Chifley's mother, where on the little veranda, Mrs. Chifley and Mrs. Mackenzie were working with embroidery, and they used to run down the steps and slide down the supports of the steps there, so much so that Barbara tells me that quite a few pants were worn out sliding down those steps. I mustn't go any further, but it's a word really from the children who knew Ben Chifley. He was a man who knew us all. He really did care. And now it's my very great pleasure to invite John Chifley. Where's John? Right in front of me. John, welcome. We all know that you've got a great interest in the family and a great knowledge of the family. And if when you're finished speaking, perhaps you can introduce or at least get to stand, whichever you wish, all the members of the family who are present.
Well, if I get them all to stand now, how about that? But all my mobs stand. The good one, to Bathurst. Love Bathurst. Actually, he got the freedom of the city, I think, over here in the showground. But he loved Bathurst, and when he was coming back from overseas, and he met the Queen and the King and the Pope and Ingrid Bergman, which was a beautiful photo. We came back into Bathurst, you see, and the journalist asked him what was the best part of the trip. And he said, above all, he said, coming down Brownsville to Bathurst. When I was over at Canberra, and I stayed in the lodge for a week with him, because he didn't stay there much. I think he went to the lodge because I went over. Anyway, the thing about it is, he had John Curtin's room as it was. Their friendship was so great The other thing about it is that during the war, I don't think we remember it, but it's hard to think about the time when things were so close. I don't know, he said, but we're doing our best and you keep up the rosary and I think we'll make it. And if you remember in those times, of course, gold bullion was down in the mountains, I think around about Lapstone, underneath the hills there. And that's how close it was. But anyway, and that period of time, that took all this, so much energy and work out of Ben Chifley and John Curtin that, you know, they died young for their jobs. But all I can say is that I think it was Dr. Everett said that Ben Chifley, this was 50 years ago, he said Ben Chifley was a great Christian statesman. And I've been going for 50 years looking him up all the time, and I think he's the greatest Christian statesman Australia has ever seen.
Thank you.
At this stage, I now call on Chairman Jeff Fry to introduce our patron, Peter Andrew. Jeff?
Welcome everybody. It's certainly my privilege today to welcome and introduce Peter Andrew, Federal Member for Calare. Right from the word go with this project, Peter put his hand up and agreed to chair the public meetings we first had, and also agreed to be patron of our committee. So please make Peter welcome.
Thank you, Jeff, and to John and the Chifley family and distinguished guests. Thank you for inviting me here today to perform this very satisfying task. Not being one of the Labor family, I think it's very symbolic that indeed I am patron of this particular effort to create a lasting memorial to Ben, because I think, having read a lot about the man over many years, he was a person who was able to communicate with all sectors of society, and while he had his very firmly held views on how the world should be, they were views that deep down I think most Australians, if they're being honest, would agree were things that were aimed at achieving what I like to call the social dividend. And it's interesting to note that part of his role, while he was Prime Minister and indeed a long-time Member of Parliament, was with Abercrombie Shire Council. And during that period as President, he took on the first of the economic rationalists of last century, I think, when the state government of the day was outsourcing much of its roadworks to contractors, and Ben and his council put in for the contract, in fact, £100,000 worth to work on the Bathurst Blaney and the Bathurst Orange Road within Abercrombie Shire, because he saw that there was a need to put that public works in a place where jobs would be provided for the men of the district, rather than letting the Teese brothers or whoever it was of that day come in and pave the roads and then get the hell out of the area and take the money with them. So he was conscious in all his public life of the common man, to use a term. His membership of the Shire, he was involved heavily with the Agricultural Society, and in fact when Joe Lyons turned up here as Prime Minister to open the show, Ben was on the gate collecting the fares as the people came through, and the Prime Minister had to walk down to the gate to have a chat to Ben for half an hour or so over here at the front gate. And of course Ben did not leave his duty until his shift was up. And that's the sort of guy he was. He was a member of the hospital board for so long, the ambulance board. He was on the board of the Advocate newspaper all his life, and of course he retained membership of his beloved AFU League. And as the son of a former railwayman, the sort of early life and his experiences resonate with those of mine. And I guess if I have a philosophy, it is it is more attuned, I suppose, with the sorts of things that Ben was trying to do to make an equal society in this country. And I think that it's the sort of equality that Australians with their fair go attitudes yearn for again. And I only hope that the spirit of Ben Chifley and the sorts of things that he tried to achieve on a social front, quite apart from his leadership during the war years and his skill as a treasurer, I hope that it may not obviously lead to nationalisation of resources and things, but it is that social dividend that we require in our life today that is so sadly lacking for many. And until we restore that, I don't think that we have a fair society. Now, Anthony Community, he is the creator of the Marjorie Jackson sculpture in Lithgow, and indeed the breakout, the Cowra breakout sculpture in Cowra. And I can think of no better person to have been asked to perform this work of art. And this is just the beginning of a project that will include a memorabilia of Ben and Elizabeth and their time in this town, and the sorts of things that they shared with this community, and the sorts of things he shared with the rest of Australia. So congratulations to Bathurst East Rotary Club and to the community of Bathurst for this splendid occasion, and to Anthony for this splendid creation. So if you'd help me, lift the flag.